The night my father forgot I existed in a room full of people, I was wearing the blue dress he once told me made me look appropriately understated. I remember standing just outside the private dining room at Hargrove's, my hand resting on the doorframe, listening to the sound of crystal glasses and polished laughter, thinking, I can do this. 2 hours. Smile. Leave. Marcus was beside me, his hand warm at the small of my back, and he leaned down and said quietly, You look beautiful. I believed him. That part mattered later. I should tell you how we got there. My father is Dr. Richard Morrison, cardiovascular surgeon, 60 years old as of that Saturday in October, which is why 31 people were gathered inside that restaurant, eating food that cost more per plate than I spend on groceries in 2 weeks. He has an office on the 14th floor of Mercy General with a view of the river. He has a reputation that precedes him into every room he enters. He has a son at Harvard Law who he introduces at parties, the way other men show off sports cars slowly, with the engine running. That son is my brother, Thomas. I am Claire. I teach 2nd grade at Millbrook Elementary. I have been teaching 2nd grade at Millbrook Elementary for 4 years. I love it. I love the way a 7-year-old's face changes when a word finally clicks into place, that specific light behind the eyes, like a window opening. I love the smell of crayons and the noise of 22 small human beings who have not yet learned to be afraid of being wrong. My father has never once asked me about any of that. When I was 22 and told him I wanted to go into education, he set down his fork at dinner and looked at me the way a man looks at a crack in an expensive wall. Not angry exactly, just deeply, personally disappointed. Claire, he said, you're not someone who can't do more. As if teaching was what happened to people who ran out of options. As if I had miscounted my own potential and arrived at the wrong answer. My mother said nothing. She has perfected the art of agreeing with silence. Thomas called me from his dorm that night, which I appreciated. Dad'll come around, he said. Thomas is not unkind. He is simply very good at believing things will resolve themselves, because for him, they always have. They did not come around. For 4 years, I showed up to family dinners and holidays and listened to my father explain to his colleagues that Thomas was at Harvard Law. Did they know the acceptance rate? Did they know what kind of doors that opens? And I sat at the end of the table with my wine and nodded when someone occasionally glanced my direction. I was background. I was the before, in a story that didn't need me. And then I met Marcus. I met him at the farmer's market on Clement Street on a Saturday morning in March, which feels like the kind of detail that shouldn't matter but does. He was buying sweet potatoes from an older man named Roy, who sold produce out of a blue and white striped tent every weekend, and the two of them were deep in a conversation about crop rotation that Marcus was clearly more invested in than Roy expected. I was standing 2 feet away waiting to pay for a bunch of radishes I didn't actually need, and I laughed not loudly, just enough at something Marcus said, and he turned around. He had kind eyes. That was the first thing. Not handsome in the way my father's world rewarded, not sharp-jawed and titled, just genuinely kind-eyed and slightly embarrassed that a stranger had caught him lecturing a farmer about his own crops. Sorry, he said. I read an article. You read an article about sweet potatoes, I said. I read a lot of articles about a lot of things. We talked for 45 minutes on the sidewalk outside Roy's tent. By the time I left, I had his number and a bag of radishes I still didn't need and something that felt, cautiously, like possibility. Marcus Webb is a paramedic. He works 48-hour shifts at Station 9 on the south side of the city, and he has been doing it for 6 years, and he is very good at it. He is good at it the way some people are good at things that cost them something, not effortlessly, not without carrying weight home, but with a kind of steady commitment that doesn't flinch. He told me once, maybe 4 months in, that he chose the job because he wanted to be the person who showed up at the worst moment of someone's life and made it slightly less terrible. Even 5% less terrible, he said. That's worth it. I thought about my father's office on the 14th floor. I thought about the view of the river. I thought about the way Marcus came home from a double shift sometimes and sat very quietly at the kitchen table for 20 minutes before he could be with people again because he was still leaving something behind at the door. I never asked him to explain that. I just made tea and sat across from him and waited. My father met Marcus in July, At a family barbecue my mother hosted in the backyard of the house I grew up in. I had told her in advance. I had said, "Mom, please just let it be normal. Please just let this be fine." She had said, "Of course, sweetheart." What she meant was, "I will try, but your father is your father." He shook Marcus's hand and said, "And what do you do?" In the tone of a man who considers this an adequate measurement of a person. Marcus told him. My father said, "Ah, just that." Ah. The single syllable of a man recalibrating his interest downward. The rest of the afternoon he spoke to Marcus 3 more times. Once to ask if he wanted another beer. Once to comment on the weather. Once to tell a story about a golf trip to Scotland that had no entry point for anyone who had not also been on a golf trip to Scotland. Marcus listened to all 3 with the same focused attention he gives everything, which I found unbearable to watch, because he was being generous to someone who was not being generous back. On the drive home, I said, "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Marcus said. He was rude. "He's your dad." He glanced at me. "And I've had harder conversations with people who were having the worst day of their lives. I can handle your father on a good afternoon." I didn't bring Marcus to another family event for 2 months after that. The 61st birthday dinner was my mother's idea. My father's 60th had been a smaller thing, a dinner at home, the 4 of us, but this year my mother decided he deserved a real celebration. 30 guests, private room at Hargrove's, a cake that arrived on a cart with candles and a waiter who had clearly rehearsed his expression of delighted surprise. Thomas flew in from Boston. My uncle Gerald drove up from Portland with my Aunt Patrice. My father's chief colleague, Dr. Leonard Harmon, came with his wife, Diane. Dr. Harmon had worked alongside my father for 11 years. He had a son named Carter, who was 26. There were also 2 other surgeons, a hospital administrator, a couple from my parents' book club, Thomas's girlfriend, who I had met once and liked, and several people I didn't recognize, but who clearly existed in my father's orbit of importance. I wore the blue dress. Marcus wore the charcoal jacket I had never seen before, which he had apparently gone out and bought without telling me, which made something tighten in my chest, in a way I couldn't fully name that he had done that quietly, on his own, because he wanted to show up right for me. The first hour was fine. We ate bread and talked, and I introduced Marcus to the people near us as my boyfriend, and a few of them asked what he did, and he told them, and some nodded with genuine interest, and asked follow-up questions about the job. And some made the same small recalibration my father had made in July. And life went on. Then my father stood up to give a toast. He does this at his own parties. It is a known thing. He toasts himself, or more accurately, he toasts the family that produced him, the life he has built, and the people who reflect well on that life. I have heard versions of this toast before. I knew its shape. He thanked my mother. He said the things a husband says at 60 that land warmly and everyone appreciates. He thanked my Uncle Gerald for making the drive. He said a few things about the hospital, the work, the privilege of a calling, that word, calling, which he has applied to surgery but has never applied to anything I have ever done. And then he looked at Thomas. "And my son," he said. "Harvard Law. First in his cohort last semester." He paused to let that settle over the room like good weather. Thomas has always known exactly what he was built for. That kind of clarity is a gift, and watching him step into it, that has been one of the great privileges of my life. Thomas looked slightly embarrassed, which I loved him for. I looked at my plate. My father moved on. He thanked a few more people. He raised his glass. The room raised their glasses. And somewhere in the middle of all of it I had become a piece of furniture present, functional, unremarkable. Then he sat down, and the man beside him, a surgeon named Philip, I had never met, asked across the table, "Richard, how many kids do you have?" My father said, "2. Thomas you just heard about, and Claire teaches elementary school." Teaches elementary school. No pause before it, no warmth inside it, just a fact about a piece of furniture. Philip said, "Oh, how nice," in the voice of a man who had already moved on. Marcus's hand found mine under the table. I didn't look at him. I kept looking at my plate, at the small decorative swirl of sauce the chef had placed beside my entree, and I thought, I am 29 years old. I am sitting in a room where my father just described my entire existence as filler content between a pause and a subject change. I thought about my second graders. About Jalen, who cried last spring when he finally read a full sentence out loud and couldn't explain why, except that it felt big. I thought about how my father has never asked me a single question about any of them. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I have had 4 years of practice, and also because Marcus was holding my hand under the table and his thumb was moving in a slow, steady arc across my knuckles, which I think was the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me at a dinner party. After the plates were cleared, people began to move around in the way people do at the end of formal dinners. Small clusters, fresh drinks, the loosening of formality. Marcus excused himself to find the restroom, and I stood near the window talking to my Aunt Patrice, who is my father's sister-in-law and therefore occupies an interesting position in the family, present at everything, accountable to nothing. "You okay?" she asked, which meant she had been watching. "I'm fine," I said. "You know he loves you." "I know he loves his idea of what I should have been," I said, which was not something I had planned to say out loud. Patrice looked at me for a moment, then squeezed my arm and said nothing, which was the right response. Marcus came back. He was crossing the room toward me, weaving between clusters of guests, and I saw the moment it happened, saw it before I understood it. Dr. Harmon, who had been standing near the bar talking to his wife Diane, went very still. He turned slowly, and his face did something I had no framework for yet. It went from social to arrested, the way a face does when it suddenly recognizes something it wasn't expecting to see. He said, "I'm sorry, excuse me," and touched his wife's arm and stepped forward. "Marcus Webb?" The room didn't go quiet all at once. It was gradual, a hush moving outward from that one voice, like a stone dropped in still water. Dr. Harmon was not a quiet man. He was the kind of man who filled a room without effort. And when he stopped filling it with conversation and started filling it with something else, people noticed. Marcus stopped. He turned toward Dr. Harmon. Something moved across his face that I read as recognition. But careful, the careful recognition of someone who meets many people in circumstances they don't always remember. "Dr. Harmon," Marcus said. "Yes, sir." "Doctor." Harmon crossed the remaining distance between them in 3 steps and extended his hand, and I watched Marcus shake it, and I watched my father, standing 6 feet away, turn and look. "My son," Dr. Harmon said. His voice had shifted. There was something raw in it that didn't belong at a birthday party for a cardiovascular surgeon, Carter. Last November. The intersection of Meridian and 54th. I watched Marcus's expression change. "The Subaru," Marcus said quietly. "The Subaru. Doctor." Harmon nodded once. His jaw was doing the thing jaws do when someone is managing something large inside a public setting. "You held his airway open for 43 minutes. The report said 43 minutes. On the side of that road, in the rain, with the dispatch, said you were talking to him the entire time, that you just kept talking. He needed something to follow," Marcus said. "Something to track." Dr. Harmon looked at him for a moment. Then he turned toward the room, toward my father specifically, because they had worked together for 11 years and he knew exactly where to look, and he said, in a voice that was not performing, but was simply stating, "My son is alive. He is 26 years old, and he is alive because this man refused to let him go on the side of a road at 11 o'clock at night, when any reasonable assessment of the situation would have made it very easy to stop trying. Carter walked at his own wedding this September." He paused. He walked. The room was quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. Not the quiet of awkwardness or embarrassment. Just the quiet of 31 people encountering something real in the middle of an event that had been, until 30 seconds ago, primarily decorative. Diane Harmon was crying. She was doing it neatly, with the dignity of a woman who has had practice, touching the corner of her eye with one knuckle. My father was looking at Marcus. I had never seen my father look at anyone quite the way he was looking at Marcus in that moment, like a man recalculating a sum he was certain he had gotten right and arriving, confusingly, at a different number. Marcus said, quietly, "How is he doing, Carter?" "He runs 3 miles every morning," Dr. Harmon said. "He complains about his knee." Marcus smiled. It was a real smile. "Good." Dr. Harmon shook his hand again, held it an extra beat, and then someone started clapping. My Aunt Patrice, I'm almost certain, and the rest of the room followed. And Marcus stood in the middle of it, with his charcoal jacket and his kind eyes, and the expression of a man who is genuinely uncomfortable with applause, which I found almost unbearable to look at directly. I looked at my father instead. He was still watching Marcus. And then he looked at me. And for just a moment, one very small, very specific moment, I saw something cross his face that I don't have a clean word for. Not shame exactly, not pride. Something in between the two. Something that required him to account for a version of reality he had not previously budgeted for. I looked back at him steadily. I did not smile. The evening continued. It had to. There were still 31 people and a cake on a cart. But the shape of it had changed. The surgeon from Boston who had said, "Oh, how nice about elementary school teaching," found his way to Marcus and asked genuine questions for 12 minutes. My Uncle Gerald clapped Marcus on the shoulder. Diane Harmon held both of my hands and said, "You have someone remarkable." And I said, "I know," and I meant it with my whole body. My father did not speak to Marcus directly for the rest of the evening. I watched him try twice, watched him approach, watched something stop him, watched him redirect. He is not a man who knows how to apologize in real time. He is a surgeon. He is accustomed to being the most certain person in the room. On the drive home, Marcus was quiet in the particular way he gets quiet after things that matter. I let it be for a while. The city moved past the windows. Eventually I said, "You never told me about Carter Harmon." "I don't talk about calls," he said. "I know. Not because of anything dramatic. Just, they belong to the people they happen to. They're not mine to tell." I looked at him. At his profile in the low light, the charcoal jacket, the hands on the wheel, with their unextraordinary knuckles, that had apparently kept a 25-year-old alive on a wet road in November while the rain came down and no one was watching. "Marcus," I said. "Yeah, I'm in love with you." He glanced over. "I know," he said. "I've been in love with you since the sweet potato conversation." I laughed, which was the right thing to feel. 2 days later, my father called me. I let it go to voicemail and listened to it standing in my kitchen with my coffee. He said he had been thinking. He said he owed me a conversation. He said the word proud once, approximately, with the hesitation of a man trying a word in a foreign language for the first time carefully, uncertain of the pronunciation. I called him back the next morning. I want to be honest about this part. It was not a movie moment. My father did not transform over one phone call into a man who suddenly understood everything he had failed to see. He said the things a man says when he is beginning, and I want to stress the word beginning to understand that he has been wrong. Some of it landed. Some of it felt like it was about Marcus's specific credential rather than anything larger, and I told him that. I said, "Dad, I need you to understand that Marcus isn't more worthy of your respect because Dr. Harmon said so at a dinner party. He was worthy of it the whole time, on every single shift, for 6 years." My father was quiet. Then he said, "I know. I don't know if he fully meant it yet. I think he was somewhere in the early territory of knowing, which is different from having arrived. But it was honest, and honesty from my father is not small." We agreed to have dinner. The 4 of us, me, Marcus, my parents, sometime in November. No occasion, no performance, just dinner. I haven't decided yet how I feel about that. What I know is this. I drove to Millbrook Elementary the Monday after my father's birthday party, and I stood in front of 22 second graders who were absolutely uninterested in the social hierarchies of adults. And I taught a lesson about fractions that went sideways in the most wonderful way when a boy named Darnell announced that half of 7 is hard and he needed more crackers to figure it out. And the whole class dissolved into completely genuine 7-year-old laughter. And I stood at the front of that room and felt, clearly and without ambiguity, exactly what I was built for. My father has never asked me about Darnell. He has never asked about the fractions or the crackers or the specific light that appears in a child's face when a window opens. Maybe he will start. I'm not holding my breath. I'm not holding anything, actually. I spent 4 years holding my tongue, holding my posture, holding a careful arrangement of myself together in rooms that required me to be less than I was. I'm done with that particular kind of holding. Marcus texted me from his shift last Tuesday. Just, Roy has butternut squash this week if you want me to grab some. And I sat in my classroom after the kids had gone home and looked at that text and thought about a man who reads articles about things just because they interest him, who talks to sweet potato farmers on Saturday mornings, who held a stranger's airway open for 43 minutes in the rain without anyone watching and never mentioned it once. I thought about what it means to do important work quietly. I thought about my father's toast. Thomas has always known exactly what he was built for. As if knowing what you're built for is the same as being right about what it should be. As if the measure of a life is the ceiling it reaches, rather than what it holds up. I texted Marcus back. Yes. And I want to cook this time. He sent back a single emoji. A sweet potato. I don't know what happens with my family from here. I know Thomas called me the week after the party and said he was sorry he didn't say something during the toast, and I told him it was okay, and I meant that too, because he is not the one who needed to say something. I know my mother sent me flowers the following week with a note that said, "I see you, sweetheart," which is maybe the closest she has ever come to acknowledging what has been happening in our family for years. I know that, Doctor. Harmon emailed me. I still don't know how he got my address to say that Carter would like to meet Marcus properly sometime, in a normal setting, without the weight of everything, that they would like to have us both to dinner. I know that Marcus said yes before I'd even finished reading the email to him. And I know that 3 weeks after the birthday party, I was walking past the supply room at school when my colleague Dana stopped me in the hallway and said, "Is it true your boyfriend is the paramedic who saved Leonard Harmon's son?" And I said yes. And she said, "That story has been going around the whole district," and I thought about Marcus at his kitchen table after a double shift, sitting quietly for 20 minutes, leaving something behind at the door. He is not a story. He is a person who chose, every single shift for 6 years, to show up at the worst moment of someone's life and make it slightly less terrible. 5%. That is worth everything. My name is Claire Morrison. I am 29 years old and I teach 2nd grade at Millbrook Elementary on Ashwood Avenue, where the parking lot floods when it rains, and the copy machine has been broken since February, and the reading corner has a beanbag chair with a small tear in it that my kids have collectively agreed is its personality. I am in love with a paramedic named Marcus Webb, who buys sweet potatoes at the farmer's market and talks to Roy about crop rotation, and once held a stranger alive on a wet road in November with nothing but his hands and his voice and the decision to not stop trying. My father is learning to know me. I am learning to let him. But I am not waiting anymore.